welcome back. I'm Christina, the manager at the PV Library, and thank you for joining me for the conclusion of week 10 of our read aloud together of The Count of Monte Cristo by Alexandre Dumas. We still have 2 more weeks left of our read along, and we're really getting to some exciting stuff happening. This week has been amazing. We've already seen, we've seen death. We'll talk about that a little bit more in a little bit. But we've seen accusations. Oh, it's been crazy. So I had actually intended to do something special for it being our 50th day of our read-along together. But it wasn't until just a moment ago when I was plugging in the little description of what we're going to be reading today that I remembered that today is the 50th day. So I did not bring the golden colored tea that I had meant to. I was going to do the mango orange tea because that is such a beautiful golden color. Instead, we have berry blossom, which is also lovely and still that nice like garnet burgundy bloody color of like the blood orange that we had yesterday. Consider still quite appropriate considering how violent and devious and less passionate, let's say, that these chapters have been lately. This week has been really tumultuous. So let's go ahead and take a sip of this calming herbal but exciting passionate looking color of tea. Very nice berry blossom. Okay, so let's talk a little bit about what we read yesterday. Today's reading is going to be relatively short. It's just 2 chapters, which after what we've been going through, the marathons of chapters, it's a short reading today. We'll be done in less than an hour. So let's start by reviewing what was in our 3 chapters yesterday. Chapter 90 was called The Meeting, and it began right after Mercedes left the home of the Count of Monte Cristo, after she had begged him to spare the life of her son, despite the wrong that Fernand Mondego had done Edmond Dantes so many years prior. And Edmond, out of his residual love and respect for Mercedes, agrees to spare the life of her son. But his pride is such that he cannot just let the insult go without submitting to being killed himself, because he can't live with that dishonor. So he tells her that, he'll let her son live, but the price will be that he will also let himself be killed. So dramatic. So at the end of that chapter, chapter 89, she leaves and he's left alone. In chapter 90, it resumes where he is realizing his own mortality is approaching. And so he revises his will, and he makes provision for Aide, whom he has raised as his daughter since she adopted him, or since he, technically purchased her as a slave, but he looks at it as adopting her. So, he has raised her as his own. And he even notes in his will that he wants to give money to Maximilian Morel, and that it would make him very happy if Maximilian Morel's affections are not engaged elsewhere, if he would someday wed Aide. We know that's not going to happen because Maximilian Morel is in love with Valentine de Villefort, but finally there's something the Count of Monte Cristo does not know. Whew, okay, I think he knows everything else in this story. So Aide comes out, though, and she is devastated when she reads over his shoulder what he's written in his will, because she says, "If you were to die, I could not live." And again, the intimation is made that she might have more than daughterly feelings for the Count of Monte Cristo. He rewrites the will, though, after she, leaves the room, because she had crumbled it up and tried to destroy it. He meets Maximilian Morel and Maximilian's brother-in-law, Emmanuel, in the morning. They go to the site of the duel. The friends of Albert de Morcerf are there, and they're speculating for a while about what's going on. Count looks very calm. Albert's not here. Thought he'd be here. He invited all of us to come. What's going on? Suddenly, Albert de Morcerf gallops up on his horse. Apparently, this is bad dueling etiquette, because I guess it makes your hands less steady if your blood's riled up. But he comes up and he says, "I need everyone to gather near. I need everyone to hear what I'm going to say to the Count of Monte Cristo." And he's like, "Oh, is he going to give me another insult?" And Maximilian Morel's like, "I don't think so. I think there's something else afoot." And indeed there is. Albert Morel apologizes to the Count of Monte Cristo. He does not deny the truth of what the Count of Monte Cristo had done. He does not deny the truth of what he had asserted, that the Count of Monte Cristo had tried to damage the reputation of his father. Instead, he acknowledged that it was deservedly so, that the father had done wrong, and moreover, that the Count of Monte Cristo had just cause in wanting to hurt and destroy the reputation of his father. So, by this, we are to understand that Mercedes has spoken to her son and has told him about how Fernand Mondego, the fisherman, had destroyed the reputation and life and taken the freedom of Edmond Dantes. and that therefore Edmond Dantes was justified in revenging himself upon that Fernand Mondego, the fisherman from so long ago, even though now he was presented to the world as the Count de Morcerf. So it's a very dramatic scene. So then after that, Albert leaves, and he goes back to his home, and he begins packing up his stuff. And by packing his stuff, I mean he takes all his valuables and he sets them aside, and then he takes his few tiny things, including the portrait of his mother, but he leaves all his valuables behind. He goes to visit his mother to see how she is, and he finds that she has done the same, even though they made no plans to do this. And they both decide that they need to leave this situation. They can no longer live in the home of Fernand Mondego, this dishonorable man, even though he is her husband and his father. So they decide to leave all the trappings of wealth and everything to do with Fernand behind, and they will make their fortune on their own. As they're about to leave, they receive a letter from the Count of Monte Cristo, who says basically, don't think too hard about how I know what's going on at your house. He obviously has spies there. He's saying, but just know that I know you're both planning on leaving and taking nothing with you, and please don't do it. Take at least this money that I had brought back as a dowry for my bride so long ago, that I'd buried in the yard of my father under the tree that he planted on the day that I was born. It's so beautiful. And he's like, and take this as the dowry that I wanted to give to Mercedes. Let her use this now as the money that will keep her safe and fed in these years. He's like, and he brings up even, do not let her suffer for the sake of your pride and needing to step out on your own away from your father. Do not let her suffer as my father suffered, who starved to death. What I find especially poignant about that scene is that it tells us that when his father starved to death, there was a fortune in his yard that he didn't know about. It was so close that it could have saved him, but the father hadn't known about that. And so, Edmond Dantes is now sharing that fortune that he had meant to give to his bride so many years before, giving it to her now, the wife of another man, the mother of this man who almost killed him in a duel, so that she can survive. It's very, very touching. So the two of them resolve that, or Mercedes says that yes, she will accept this gift and they will go. And so they resolve that they're going to leave the home of the Comte de Morcerf. Meanwhile, parallel timeline, the story goes back a little bit in chapter 92, and it's called The Suicide, so we have an idea of what's going to happen. It's basically that it begins with the Count of Monte Cristo going back to his home, talking to Maximilian Morel, and saying, like, come on in, have breakfast with me. And Maximilian Morel saying, I think I have something else I need to do. And the Count of Monte Cristo, who had actually asked Maximilian before the duel, or before he thought he was going to have the duel, if he might, if his emotions were unencumbered, perhaps he might be interested in ideas, what he was getting towards. But Maximilian says, no, there is a young woman whom he is in love with. He does not yet confide the name to the Count of Monte Cristo, but he does reveal that he does have feelings for someone. And the Count says, well, fine, go see your beautiful young lady, but remember, if there's ever any service I can provide to the two of you, let me know. And Maximilian Morel happily says that he will, and he goes off, hopefully, to see Valentine. Then what happens is the Count of Monte Cristo finds out about, from Bertuccio, what's going on at the home of the Morcerfs, and that's when he writes that letter to Albert and to Mercedes about the fortune. He sends that off, and while he's waiting for perhaps a reply, he finds that he has another guest, and he is told that it is Monsieur de Morcerf. Could be the elder, could be the younger. It is the elder. It is Fernand Mondego himself, and basically he comes and he says, I heard that my son went to duel with you, and that my son walked away. It's like, we are men, I'll not walk away. And so he brings out like two swords, and he's like, let's fight to the death. I'm like, all right, let's fight to the death. And the Count of Monte Cristo says something about, Fernand says, we need no witnesses. And the Count of Monte Cristo says, indeed, it's unnecessary because we know each other so well. And Fernand retorts that indeed they know each other not very much at all. That, he doesn't even know the name of the Count of Monte Cristo. He goes by one thing in Italy, another thing in Malta. He goes by all these different names. But who is he really? And the Count of Monte Cristo says, you want to know who I am? I'll show you who I am. He goes to the room. This gets a little weird. He changes his clothes, and he comes back out in the kind of clothes he used to wear when he was a sailor. So he comes in the traditional outfit of a French sailor, and he says, look at me now. And when he sees this man dressed as he once was when he was a young man 24 years ago, Fernand Mondego recognizes Edmond Dantes. And he is struck back, just struck dumb by what by this ghost of the past come back, and to realize that this is the man who's been the agent of his own shame and destruction, or the ruin of his reputation. He was himself he caused his own downfall, but it was the Count of Monte Cristo who brought it to light. And he leaves. He just makes it back to his home. He comes back, and as he's arriving back at his home, he sees his wife and his son leaving and saying, "Come, this is no longer our home." And he sees them get into a hired coach and leave. And when they leave, they don't even turn back once to look behind at the home, at the memories, at the man they've left behind. And you can tell he's devastated, because the chapter ends with him with just the sound of a gunshot echoing through and breaking the glass. So the suicide was Fernand Mondego. Okay, today we are reading only 2 chapters. As always, they're good chapters. We're going to just read 2 today, so we're going to read chapters 93 and 94. Chapter 93 is entitled Valentine. We may easily conceive where Morel's appointment was. On leaving Monte Cristo, he walked slowly towards Villafort's. We say slowly, for Morel had more than half an hour to spare to go 500 steps. But he had hastened to take leave of Monte Cristo because he wished to be alone with his thoughts. He knew his time well, the hour when Valentine was giving Noirtier his breakfast, and was sure not to be disturbed in the performance of this pious duty. Noirtier and Valentine had given him leave to go twice a week, and he was now availing himself of that permission. He arrived. Valentine was expecting him. Uneasy and almost crazed, she seized his hand and led him to her grandfather. This uneasiness, amounting almost to frenzy, arose from the report Morcerf's adventure had made in the world, for the affair at the opera was generally known. No one at Villafort's doubted that a duel would ensue from it. Valentine, with her woman's instinct, guessed that Morel would be Monte Cristo's second, and from the young man's well-known courage and his great affection for the Count, she feared that he would not content himself with the passive part assigned to him. We may easily understand how eagerly the particulars were asked for, given, and received, and Morel could read an indescribable joy in the eyes of his beloved when she knew that the termination of this affair was as happy as it was unexpected. "Now," said Valentine, motioning to Morel to sit down near her grandfather while she took her seat on his footstool, "now let us talk about our own affairs. You know, Maximilian, Grandpapa once thought of leaving this house and taking an apartment away from Monsieur de Villafort's." "Yes," said Maximilian, "I recollect the project, of which I highly approved." "Well," said Valentine, "you may approve again, for Grandpapa is again thinking of it." "Bravo," said Maximilian. "And do you know," said Valentine, "what reason Grandpapa gives for leaving this house?" Noirtier looked at Valentine to impose silence, but she did not notice him. Her looks, her eyes, her smile were all for Morel. "Oh, whatever may be Monsieur Noirtier's reason," answered Morel, "I can readily believe it to be a good one." "An excellent one," said Valentine. "He pretends the air of the Faubourg Saint-Honoré is not good for me." "Indeed," said Morel. "In that Monsieur Noirtier might be right. You have not seemed to be well for the last fortnight." "Not very," said Valentine, "and Grandpapa has become my physician, and I have the greatest confidence in him, because he knows everything." "Do you then really suffer?" asked Morel quickly. "Oh, it must not be called suffering. I feel a general uneasiness, that is all. I have lost my appetite, and my stomach feels as if it were struggling to get accustomed to something." Noirtier did not lose a word of what Valentine said. "And what treatment do you adopt for this singular complaint?" "A very simple one," said Valentine. "I swallow every morning a spoonful of the mixture prepared for my grandfather. When I say 1 spoonful, I began by 1. Now I take 4. Grandpapa says it is a panacea." Valentine smiled, but it was evident that she suffered. Maximilian, in his devotedness, gazed silently at her. She was very beautiful, but her usual pallor had increased. Her eyes were more brilliant than ever, and her hands, which were generally white like mother of pearl, now more resembled wax, to which time was adding a yellowish hue. From Valentine, the young man looked towards Noirtier. The latter watched with strange and deep interest the young girl, absorbed by her affection, and he also, like Morel, followed those traces of inward suffering which was so little perceptible to a common observer that they escaped the notice of everyone but the grandfather and the lover. "But," said Morel, "I thought this mixture, of which you now take 4 spoonfuls, was prepared for Monsieur Noirtier." "I know it is very bitter," said Valentine, "so bitter that all I drink afterwards appears to have the same taste." Noirtier looked inquiringly at his granddaughter. "Yes, grandpapa," said Valentine, "it is so. Just now, before I came down to you, I drank a glass of sugared water. I left half because it seemed so bitter." Noirtier turned pale and made a sign that he wished to speak. Valentine rose to fetch the dictionary. Noirtier watched her with evident anguish. In fact, the blood was rushing to the young girl's head already. Her cheeks were becoming red. "Oh," cried she, without losing any of her cheerfulness, "this is singular. I can't see. Did the sun shine in my eyes?" And she leaned against the window. "The sun is not shining," said Morel, more alarmed by Noirtier's expression than by Valentine's indisposition. He ran towards her. The young girl smiled. "Cheer up," said she to Noirtier. "Do not be alarmed, Maximilian. It is nothing and has already passed away. But listen, do I not hear a carriage in the courtyard?" She opened Noirtier's door, ran to a window in the passage, and returned hastily. "Yes," said she, "it is Madame Danglars and her daughter, who have come to call on us. Goodbye. I must run away, for they would send here for me, or rather, farewell till I see you again. Stay with grandpapa, Maximilian. I promise you not to persuade them to stay." Morel watched her as she left the room. He heard her ascend the little staircase which led both to Madame de Villefort's apartments and to hers. As soon as she was gone, Noirtier made a sign to Morel to take the dictionary. Morel obeyed. Guided by Valentine, he had learned how to understand the old man quickly. Accustomed, however, as he was to the work, he had to repeat most of the letters of the alphabet and to find every word in the dictionary, so that it was 10 minutes before the thought of the old man was translated by these words: "Fetch the glass of water and the decanter from Valentine's room." Morel rang immediately for the servant who had taken Barroise's situation, and in Noirtier's name gave that order. The servant soon returned. The decanter and the glass were completely empty. Noirtier made a sign that he wished to speak. "Why are the glass and decanter empty?" asked he. Valentine said she only drank half the glassful. The translation of this new question occupied another 5 minutes. "I do not know," said the servant, "but the housemaid is in Mademoiselle Valentine's room. Perhaps she is empty then." "Ask her," said Morel, translating Noirtier's thoughts, this time by his look. The servant went out, but returned almost immediately. "Mademoiselle Valentine passed through the room to go to Madame de Villefort's, and in passing, as she was thirsty, she drank what remained in the glass. As for the decanter, Master Edward had emptied that to make a pond for his ducks." Noirtier raised his eyes to heaven, as a gambler does who stakes his all on one stroke. From that moment the old man's eyes were fixed on the door and did not quit it. It was indeed Madame Danglars and her daughter whom Valentine had seen. They had been ushered into Madame de Villefort's room, who had said she would receive them there. That is why Valentine passed through her room, which was on a level with Valentine's, and only separated from it by Edward's. The two ladies entered the drawing-room with that sort of official stiffness which precludes a formal communication. Among worldly people, manner is contagious. Madame de Villefort received them with equal solemnity. Valentine entered at this moment, and the formalities were resumed. "My dear friend," said the Baroness, while the two young people were shaking hands, "I and Eugenie are come to be the first to announce to you the approaching marriage of my daughter with Prince Cavalcanti. Danglars kept up the title of prince. The popular banker found that it answered better than count. "Allow me to present you my sincere congratulations," replied Madame de Villefort. "Prince Cavalcanti appears to be a young man of rare qualities." "Listen," said the Baroness, smiling. "Speaking to you as a friend, I can say that the prince does not yet appear all he will be. He has about him a little of that foreign manner by which French persons recognize, at first sight, the Italian or German nobleman. Besides, he gives evidence of great kindness of disposition, much keenness of wit, and as to suitability, Monsieur Danglars assures me that his fortune is majestic. That is his word." "And then," said Eugenie, while turning over the leaves of Madame de Villefort's album, add that you have taken a great fancy to the young man." "And," said Madame de Villefort, "I need not ask you if you share that fancy." "I," replied Eugenie, with her usual candor, "oh, not the least in the world, madame. My wish was not to confine myself to domestic cares or the caprices of any man, but to be an artist, and consequently free in heart, in person, and in thought." Eugenie pronounced these words with so firm a tone that the color mounted to Valentine's cheeks. The timid girl could not understand that vigorous nature which appeared to have none of the timidities of woman. "At any rate," said she, "since I am to be married whether I will or not, I ought to be thankful to Providence for having released me from my engagement with Monsieur Albert de Morcerf, or I should this day have been the wife of a dishonored man." "It is true," said the Baroness, with that strange simplicity sometimes met with among fashionable ladies, and of which plebeian intercourse can never entirely deprive them. "It is very true that had not the Morcerfs hesitated, my daughter would have married Monsieur Albert. The general depended much on it. He even came to force Monsieur Danglars. We have had a narrow escape." "But," said Valentine timidly, "does all the father's shame revert upon the son? Monsieur Albert appears to me quite innocent of the treason charged against the general." "Excuse me," said the implacable young girl. "Monsieur Albert claims and well deserves his share. It appears that after having challenged Monsieur de Monte Cristo at the opera yesterday, he apologized on the ground today." "Impossible," said Madame de Villefort. "Ah, my dear friend," said Madame Danglars, with the same simplicity we before noted, "it is a fact. I heard it from Monsieur Debray, who was present at the explanation." Valentine also knew the truth, but she did not answer. A single word had reminded her that Morrel was expecting her in Monsieur Noirtier's room. Deeply engaged with a sort of inward contemplation, Valentine had ceased for a moment to join in the conversation. She would, indeed, have found it impossible to repeat what had been said the last few minutes, when suddenly Madame Danglars' hand, pressed on her arm, aroused her from her lethargy. "What is it?" said she, starting at Madame Danglars' touch, as she would have done from an electric shock. "It is, my dear Valentine," said the Baroness, "that you are doubtless suffering." "I?" said the young girl, passing her hand across her burning forehead. "Yes. Look at yourself in that glass. You have turned pale and then red successively, 3 or 4 times in 1 minute." "Indeed," cried Eugenie, "you are very pale." "Oh, do not be alarmed. I have been so for many days." Artless as she was, the young girl knew that this was an opportunity to leave, and besides, Madame de Villefort came to her assistance. "Retire, Valentine," said she. "You are really suffering, and these ladies will excuse you. Drink a glass of pure water. It will restore you." Valentine kissed Eugenie, bowed to Madame Danglars, who had already risen to take her leave, and went out. "That poor child," said Madame de Villefort when Valentine was gone. "She makes me very uneasy, and I should not be astonished if she had some serious illness." Meanwhile, Valentine, in a sort of excitement which she could not quite understand, had crossed Edward's room without noticing some trick of the child, and through her own had reached the little staircase. She was within 3 steps of the bottom. She already heard Morel's voice, when suddenly a cloud passed over her eyes. Her stiffened foot missed the step. Her hands had no power to hold the baluster, and falling against the wall, she lost her balance wholly and toppled to the floor. Morel bounded to the door, opened it, and found Valentine stretched out at the bottom of the stairs. Quick as a flash, he raised her in his arms and placed her in a chair. Valentine opened her eyes. "Oh, what a clumsy thing I am," said she, with feverish volubility. "I don't know my way. I forgot there were 3 more steps before the landing." "You have hurt yourself, perhaps," said Morel. "What can I do for you, Valentine?" Valentine looked around her. She saw the deepest terror depicted in Noirtier's eyes. "Don't worry, dear grandpapa," said she, endeavoring to smile. "It is nothing. It is nothing. I was giddy, that is all." "Another attack of giddiness," said Morel, clasping his hands. "Oh, attend to it, Valentine. I entreat you. "But no," said Valentine. "No, I tell you it is all past, and it was nothing. Now, let me tell you some news. Eugenie is to be married in a week, and in 3 days there is to be a grand feast, a betrothal festival. We are all invited, my father, Madame de Villefort, and I. At least I understood it so." "When will it be our turn to think of these things? Oh, Valentine, you who have so much influence over your grandpapa, try to make him answer soon." "And do you," said Valentine, "depend on me to stimulate the tardiness and arouse the memory of grandpapa?" "Yes," cried Morel, "make haste. So long as you are not mine, Valentine, I shall always think I may lose you." "Oh," replied Valentine with a convulsive movement, "oh, indeed, Maximilian, you are too timid for an officer, for a soldier who, they say, never knows fear. Ha, ha, ha." She burst into a forced and melancholy laugh. Her arms stiffened and twisted, her head fell back on her chair, and she remained motionless. The cry of terror which was stopped on Noirtier's lips seemed to start from his eyes. Morel understood it. He knew he must call assistance. The young man rang the bell violently. The housemaid who had been in Mademoiselle Valentine's room and the servant who had replaced Barrois ran in at the same moment. Valentine was so pale, so cold, so inanimate that without listening to what was said to them, they were seized with the fear which pervaded that house, and they flew into the passage crying for help. Madame Danglars and Eugenie were going out at that moment. They heard the cause of the disturbance. "I told you so!" exclaimed Madame de Villefort. "Poor child!" And now chapter 94, Maximilian's avowal. At the same moment, Monsieur de Villefort's voice was heard calling from his study. "What is the matter?" Morel looked at Noirtier, who had recovered his self-command, and with a glance indicated the closet where once before, under somewhat similar circumstances, he had taken refuge. He had only time to get his hat and throw himself breathless into the closet when the procureur's footstep was heard in the passage. Villefort sprang into the room, ran to Valentine, and took her in his arms. "A physician! A physician! Monsieur d'Avrigny!" cried Villefort, "or rather, I will go for him myself." He flew from the apartment, and Morel, at the same moment, darted out at the other door. He had been struck to the heart by a frightful recollection. The conversation he had heard between the doctor and Villefort the night of Madame de Saint-Méran's death recurred to him. These symptoms, to a less alarming extent, were the same which had preceded the death of Barrois. At the same time, Monte Cristo's voice seemed to resound in his ear with the words he had heard only 2 hours before. "Whatever you want, Morel, come to me. I have great power." More rapidly than thought, he darted down the Rue Matignon and thence to the Avenue des Champs-Élysées. Meanwhile, Monsieur de Villefort arrived in a hired cabriolet at Monsieur d'Avrigny's door. He rang so violently that the porter was alarmed. Villefort ran upstairs without saying a word. The porter knew him and let him pass, only calling to him, "In his study, Monsieur Procureur, in his study." Villefort pushed, or rather forced, the door open. "Ah," said the doctor, "is it you?" "Yes," said Villefort, closing the door after him. "It is I, who am come in my turn to ask you if we are quite alone. Doctor, my house is accursed." "What?" said the latter, with apparent coolness, but with deep emotion. "Have you another invalid?" "Yes, doctor," cried Villefort, clutching his hair. "Yes." D'Avrigny's look implied, "I told you it would be so." Then he slowly uttered these words, "Who is now dying in your house? What new victim is going to accuse you of weakness before God?" A mournful sob burst from Villefort's heart. He approached the doctor, and seizing his arm, "Valentine," said he, "it is Valentine's turn." "Your daughter!" cried d'Avrigny, with grief and surprise. "You see you were deceived," murmured the magistrate. "Come and see her, and on her bed of agony entreat her pardon for having suspected her." "Each time you have applied to me," said the doctor, "it has been too late. Still, I will go. But let us make haste, sir. With the enemies you have to do with, there is no time to be lost." "Oh, this time, doctor, you shall not have to reproach me with weakness. This time I will know the assassin and will pursue him." "Let us try first to save the victim before we think of revenging her," said d'Avrigny. "Come." The same cabriolet which had brought Villefort took them back at full speed, and at this moment Morrel rapped at Monte Cristo's door. The Count was in his study and was reading with an angry look something which Bertuccio had brought in haste. Hearing the name of Morrel, who had left him only 2 hours before, the Count raised his head, arose, and sprang to meet him. "What is the matter, Maximilian?" asked he. "You are pale, and the perspiration rolls from your forehead." Morrel fell into a chair. "Yes," said he, "I came quickly. I wanted to speak to you." "Are all your family well?" asked the Count, with an affectionate benevolence whose sincerity no one could for a moment doubt. "Thank you, Count. Thank you," said the young man, evidently embarrassed how to begin the conversation. "Yes, everyone in my family is well." "So much the better. Yet you have something to tell me?" replied the Count with increased anxiety. "Yes," said Morrel, "it is true. I have but now left a house where death has just entered, to run to you." "Are you then come from Monsieur de Morcerf's?" asked Monte Cristo. "No," said Morrel. "Is someone dead in his house?" "The general has just blown his brains out," replied Monte Cristo with great coolness. "Oh, what a dreadful event!" cried Maximilian. "Not for the Countess, or for Albert," said Monte Cristo. "A dead father or husband is better than a dishonored one. Blood washes out shame." "Poor Countess," said Maximilian. "I pity her very much. She is so noble a woman." "Pity Albert also, Maximilian, for believe me, he is the worthy son of the Countess. But let us return to yourself. You have hastened to me. Can I have the happiness of being useful to you?" "Yes, I need your help. That is, I thought like a madman that you could lend me your assistance in a case where God alone can succor me." "Tell me what it is," replied Monte Cristo. "Oh," said Morrel, I know not indeed if I may reveal this secret to mortal ears, but fatality impels me, necessity constrains me. Count—" Morrel hesitated. "Do you think I love you?" said Monte Cristo, taking the young man's hand affectionately in his. "Oh, you encourage me, and something tells me there," placing his hand on his heart, "that I ought to have no secret from you." "You are right, Morrel. God is speaking to your heart, and your heart speaks to you. Tell me what it says." "Count, will you allow me to send Baptistine to inquire after someone you know?" "I am at your service, and still more my servant's." "Oh, I cannot live if she is not better." "Shall I ring for Baptistine?" "No, I will go and speak to him myself." Morrel went out, called Baptistine, and whispered a few words to him. The valet ran directly. "Well, have you sent?" asked Monte Cristo, seeing Morrel return. "Yes, and now I shall be more calm." "You know I am waiting," said Monte Cristo, smiling. "Yes, and I will tell you. One evening I was in a garden. A clump of trees concealed me. No one suspected I was there. 2 persons passed near me. Allow me to conceal their names for the present. They were speaking in an undertone, and yet I was so interested in what they said that I did not lose a single word." "This is a gloomy introduction, if I may judge from your pallor and shuddering, Morrel." "Oh, yes, very gloomy, my friend. Someone had just died in the house to which that garden belonged. One of the persons whose conversation I overheard was the master of the house, the other the physician. The former was confiding to the latter his grief and fear, for it was the second time within a month that death had suddenly and unexpectedly entered that house, which was apparently destined to destruction by some exterminating angel as an object of God's anger. Ah, indeed, said Monte Cristo, looking earnestly at the young man, and by an imperceptible movement turning his chair, so that he remained in the shade while the light fell full on Maximilian's face. Yes, continued Morrel, death had entered that house twice within 1 month. And what did the doctor answer? Asked Monte Cristo. He replied that the death was not a natural one and must be attributed to what? To poison. Indeed, said Monte Cristo, with a slight cough which in moments of extreme emotion helped him to disguise a blush, or his pallor, or the intense interest with which he listened. Indeed, Maximilian, did you hear that? Yes, my dear Count, I heard it, and the doctor added that if another death occurred in a similar way, he must appeal to justice. Monte Cristo listened, or appeared to do so, with the greatest calmness. Well, said Maximilian, death came a third time, and neither the master of the house nor the doctor said a word. Death is now perhaps striking a fourth blow. Count, what am I bound to do, being in possession of this secret? My dear friend, said Monte Cristo, you appear to be relating an adventure which we all know by heart. I know the house where you heard it, or one very similar to it, a house with a garden, a master, a physician, and where there have been 3 unexpected and sudden deaths. Well, I have not intercepted your confidence, and yet I know all that as well as you, and I have no conscientious scruples. No, it does not concern me. You say an exterminating angel appears to have devoted that house to God's anger? Well, who says your supposition is not reality? Do not notice things which those whose interest it is to see them Do not notice things which those whose interest it is to see them pass over. If it is God's justice, instead of his anger, which is walking through that house, Maximilian, turn away your face and let his justice accomplish its purpose. Morrel shuddered. There was something mournful, solemn, and terrible in the Count's manner. Besides, continued he, in so changed a tone that no one would have supposed it was the same person speaking, besides, who says that it will begin again? It has returned, Count, exclaimed Morrel. That is why I hastened to you. Well, what do you wish me to do? Do you wish me, for instance, to give information to the procurer? Monte Cristo uttered the last words with so much meaning that Morrel, starting up, cried out, You know of whom I speak, Count, do you not? Perfectly well, my good friend, and I will prove it to you by putting the dots to the I, or rather by naming the persons. You were walking one evening in Monsieur de Villefort's garden. From what you relate, I suppose it to have been the evening of Madame de Saint-Méran's death. You heard Monsieur de Villefort talking to Monsieur d'Avrigny about the death of Monsieur de Saint-Méran, and that no less surprising of the Countess. Monsieur d'Avrigny said he believed that both proceeded from poison, and you, honest man, have ever since been asking your heart and sounding your conscience to know if you ought to expose or conceal this secret. We are no longer in the Middle Ages. There is no longer a Vehmgericht or free tribunals. What do you want to ask these people? Conscience, what hast thou to do with me? As Sterne said. My dear fellow, let them sleep on if they are asleep. Let them grow pale in their drowsiness if they are disposed to do so. And pray, do you remain in peace, who have no remorse to disturb you. Deep grief was depicted on Morrel's features. He seized Monte Cristo's hand. But it is beginning again, I say. Well, said the Count, astonished at his perseverance, which he could not understand, and looking still more earnestly at Maximilian, let it begin again. It is like the house of the Atreidai. God has condemned them, and they must submit to their punishment. They will all disappear, like the fabrics children build with cards, and which fall one by one under the breath of their builder, even if there are 200 of them. 3 months since, it was Monsieur de Saint-Méran. Madame de Saint-Méran 2 months since. The other day it was Barrois. Today the old Noirtier or young Valentine. You knew it, cried Morel, in such a paroxysm of terror that Monte Cristo started, he whom the falling heavens would have found unmoved. You knew it, and said nothing? And what is it to me, replied Monte Cristo, shrugging his shoulders. Do I know those people, and must I lose the one to save the other? Faith, no, for between the culprit and the victim I have no choice. But I, cried Morel, groaning with sorrow, I love her. You love? Whom? Cried Monte Cristo, starting to his feet and seizing the two hands which Morel was raising towards heaven. I love most fondly. I love madly. I love as a man who would give his lifeblood to spare her a tear. I love Valentine de Villefort, who is being murdered at this moment. Do you understand me? I love her, and I ask God and you how I can save her. Monte Cristo uttered a cry which those only can conceive who have heard the roar of a wounded lion. Unhappy man, cried he, wringing his hands in his turn. You love Valentine, that daughter of an accursed race. Never had Morel witnessed such an expression. Never had so terrible an eye flashed before his face. Never had the genius of terror he had so often seen, either on the battlefield or in the murderous nights of Algeria, shaken around him more dreadful fire. He drew back, terrified. As for Monte Cristo, after this ebullition, he closed his eyes as if dazzled by internal light. In a moment he restrained himself so powerfully that the tempestuous heaving of his breast subsided as turbulent and foaming waves yield to the sun's genial influence when the cloud has passed. This silence, self-control, and struggle lasted about 20 seconds. Then the Count raised his pallid face. See, said he, my dear friend, how God punishes the most thoughtless and unfeeling men for their indifference, by presenting dreadful scenes to their view. I, who was looking on, an eager and curious spectator, I, who was watching the workings of this mournful tragedy, I, who like a wicked angel was laughing at the evil men committed, protected by secrecy, a secret is easily kept by the rich and powerful. I am in my turn bitten by the serpent whose tortuous course I was watching, and bitten to the heart. Morel groaned. Come, come, continued the Count, complaints are unavailing. Be a man, be strong, be full of hope, for I am here, and will watch over you. Morel shook his head sorrowfully. I tell you to hope. Do you understand me? Cried Monte Cristo. Remember that I have never uttered a falsehood and am never deceived. It is 12 o'clock, Maximilian. Thank heaven that you came at noon rather than in the evening or tomorrow morning. Listen, Morel. It is noon. If Valentine is not now dead, she will not die. How so? Cried Morel. When I left her dying. Monte Cristo pressed his hands to his forehead. What was passing in that brain so loaded with dreadful secrets? What does the angel of light or the angel of darkness say to that mind, at once implacable and generous? God only knows. Monte Cristo raised his head once more, and this time he was calm as a child awaking from its sleep. Maximilian, said he, return home. I command you not to stir. Attempt nothing, not to let your conscience betray a thought, and I will send you tidings. Go. Oh, Count, you overwhelm me with that coolness. Have you then power against death? Are you superhuman? Are you an angel? And the young man, who had never shrunk from danger, shrank before Monte Cristo with indescribable terror. But Monte Cristo looked at him with so melancholy and sweet a smile that Maximilian felt the tears filling his eyes. I can do much for you, my friend, replied the Count. Go, I must be alone. Morel, subdued by the extraordinary ascendancy Monte Cristo exercised over everything around him, did not endeavor to resist it. He pressed the Count's hand and left. He stopped one moment at the door for Baptistine, whom he saw in the Rue Matignon, and who was running. Meanwhile, Villefort and d'Avrigny had made all possible haste. Valentine had not revived from her fainting fit on their arrival, and the doctor examined the invalid with all the care the circumstances demanded, and with an interest which the knowledge of the secret intensified twofold. Villefort, closely watching his countenance and his lips, awaited the result of his examination. Noirtier, paler than even the young girl, more eager than Villefort for the decision, was watching also intently and affectionately. At last, d'Avrigny slowly uttered these words, "She is still alive." "Still?" cried Villefort. "Oh, doctor, what a dreadful word is that?" "Yes," said the physician, "I repeat it. She is still alive, and I am astonished at it." "But is she safe?" asked the father. "Yes, since she lives." At that moment, d'Avrigny's glance met Noirtier's eye. It glistened with such extraordinary joy, so rich and full of thought, that the physician was struck. He placed the young girl again on the chair. Her lips were scarcely discernible. They were so pale and white as well as her whole face, and remained motionless, looking at Noirtier, who appeared to anticipate and commend all he did. "Sir," said d'Avrigny to Villefort, "call Mademoiselle Valentine's maid, if you please." Villefort went himself to find her, and d'Avrigny approached Noirtier. "Have you something to tell me?" asked he. The old man winked his eyes expressively, which we may remember was his only way of expressing his approval. "Privately?" "Yes." "Well, I will remain with you." At this moment Villefort returned, followed by the lady's maid, and after her came Madame de Villefort. "What is the matter, then, with this dear child? She has just left me, and she complained of being indisposed, but I did not think seriously of it." The young woman, with tears in her eyes and every mark of affection of a true mother, approached Valentine and took her hand. d'Avrigny continued to look at Noirtier. He saw the eyes of the old man dilate and become round. His cheeks turn pale and tremble. The perspiration stood in drops upon his forehead. "Ah," said he, involuntarily following Noirtier's eyes, which were fixed on Madame de Villefort, who repeated, "This poor child would be better in bed. Come, Fanny, we will put her to bed." Monsieur d'Avrigny, who saw that would be a means of his remaining alone with Noirtier, expressed his opinion that it was the best thing that could be done, but he forbade that anything should be given to her except what he ordered. They carried Valentine away. She had revived, but could scarcely move or speak, so shaken was her frame by the attack. She had, however, just power to give one parting look to her grandfather, who in losing her seemed to be resigning his very soul. d'Avrigny followed the invalid, wrote a prescription, ordered Villefort to take a cabriolet, go in person to a chemist to get the prescribed medicine, bring it himself, and wait for him in his daughter's room. Then, having renewed his injunction not to give Valentine anything, he went down again to Noirtier, shut the doors carefully, and after convincing himself that no one was listening, "Do you," said he, "know anything of this young lady's illness?" "Yes," said the old man. "We have no time to lose. I will question, and do you answer me." Noirtier made a sign that he was ready to answer. "Did you anticipate the accident which has happened to your grandfather?" "Yes." d'Avrigny reflected a moment, then approaching Noirtier, "Pardon what I am going to say," added he, "but no indication should be neglected in this terrible situation. Did you see poor Barrois die?" Noirtier raised his eyes to heaven. "Do you know of what he died?" asked d'Avrigny, placing his hand on Noirtier's shoulder. "Yes," replied the old man. "Do you think he died a natural death?" A sort of smile was discernible on the motionless lips of Noirtier. "Then you have thought that Barrois was poisoned?" "Yes." "Do you think the poison he fell a victim to was intended for him?" "No." "Do you think the same hand which unintentionally struck Barrois has now attacked Valentine?" "Yes." "Then will she die too?" asked d'Avrigny, fixing his penetrating gaze on Noirtier. He watched the effect of this question on the old man. "No. No," replied he with an air of triumph which would have puzzled the most clever diviner. "Then you hope?" said d'Avrigny with surprise. "Yes." "What do you hope?" The old man made him understand with his eyes that he could not answer. Ah, yes, it is true, murmured d'Avrigny. Then turning to Noirtier, do you hope the assassin will be tried? No. Then you hope the poison will take no effect on Valentine? Yes. It is no news to you, added d'Avrigny, to tell you that an attempt has been made to poison her? The old man made a sign that he entertained no doubt upon the subject. Then how do you hope Valentine will escape? Noirtier kept his eyes steadfastly fixed on the same spot. d'Avrigny followed the direction and saw that they were fixed on a bottle containing the mixture which he took every morning. Ah, indeed, said d'Avrigny, struck with a strange thought. Has it occurred to you? Noirtier did not let him finish. Yes, said he. To prepare her system to resist poison? Yes. By accustoming her by degrees? Yes, 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 said Noirtier, delighted to be understood. Of course, I had told you that there was brucine in the mixture I give you. Yes, and by accustoming her to that poison, you have endeavored to neutralize the effect of a similar poison. Noirtier's joy continued. And you have succeeded, exclaimed d'Avrigny. Without that precaution, Valentine would have died before assistance could have been procured. The dose has been excessive, but she has only been shaken by it, and this time, at any rate, Valentine will not die. A superhuman joy expanded the old man's eyes, which were raised towards heaven with an expression of infinite gratitude. At this moment, Villefort returned. Here, doctor, said he, is what you sent me for. Was this prepared in your presence? Yes, replied the procureur. Have you not let it go out of your hands? No. d'Avrigny took the bottle, poured some drops of the mixture it contained in the hollow of his hand, and swallowed them. Well, said he, let us go to Valentine. I will give instructions to everyone, and you, Monsieur de Villefort, will yourself see that no one deviates from them. At the moment when d'Avrigny was returning to Valentine's room, accompanied by Villefort, an Italian priest of serious demeanor and calm and firm tone, hired for his use the house adjoining the hotel of Monsieur de Villefort. No one knew how the 3 former tenants of that house left it. About 2 hours afterwards, its foundation was reported to be unsafe, but the report did not prevent the new occupant establishing himself there with his modest furniture the same day at 5 o'clock. The lease was drawn up for 3, 6, or 9 years by the new tenant, who, according to the rule of the proprietor, paid 6 months in advance. This new tenant, who, as we have said, was an Italian, was called Il Signor Giacomo Busoni. Workmen were immediately called in, and that same night the passengers at the end of the Faubourg saw with surprise that carpenters and masons were occupied in repairing the lower part of the tottering house. And that concludes our week of reading. Valentine is on death's door, saved by the precautions of Monsieur Noirtier, and the Count of Monte Cristo has realized that his friend and the child of his former employer and one of the few people who remained kindly disposed to he and his father, that Maximilien Morel is in love with Valentine de Villefort, the son or the daughter of one of the men whom he has sworn revenge upon. Oh dear. So we'll see what happens next now that the Abbé Busoni, the Count of Monte Cristo, has moved into the house next door to the Villefort mansion, and we'll find out what happens next week. Just so you know, the library is closed on Monday in observance of Labor Day, and so I'm actually going to try to record in advance the reading that we're going to do on Monday. If I have technical difficulties, I'll join you live on Monday afternoon. But either way, I hope you have a great rest of your weekend, and I will see you again next week. Bye.